Hello there, and welcome to lesson 6 of cell biology. This one is going to be on stem cells, and always please make sure that you do have those tools that you need, so a pencil, pen, highlighter, and a ruler if you have one, and just make sure again that you are in a quiet space so you can focus for the rest of this lesson, okay? And take it at your own pace. So, with always, we're going to start off with a do now, and there's going to be 8 questions. I know I only have 4 on the screen, but do all 8 questions, pause the video, and go ahead and do that. Perfect. All right, so remember that do now questions always refer back to previous lessons, so if you're always stuck on them, be sure to go back and review the ones that you got wrong. Number 1, identify what a chromosome is. So this one goes back to the lesson where we talked about chromosomes, obviously, and they're going to be the genetic material, or the DNA, that are all condensed and coiled up. So remember that chromosomes are in that X shape, and humans have 23 pairs, so 46 in total. Number 2, define the Greek term chromosome. So chromosome comes from the 2 words chroma and soma, which stand for color and body, respectively. Number 3, state what happens during interphase. So if you go back to the last lesson, we talked about the cell cycle, and a majority, or like close to 75 to 80% of the whole cell cycle is interphase. And this is where the cell will grow and replicate itself in preparation for mitosis. So that brings us to question 4. Each cell carries out mitosis at different times. True or false? This one is true because each cell is in different places of the cell cycle. So some cells might be in interphase, other cells might be in mitosis, but not every cell will go through mitosis at the same time. Okay. Number 5, state the name given to the 2 cells produced in mitosis. So these ones we call the daughter cells. All right. And number 6, state the differences between these cells. So those 2 daughter cells, what are the differences? And in mitosis, there's actually no differences at all. So these we call identical daughter cells because they are exactly the same. Number 7, identify what a karyotype is. So remember that when we were talking about chromosomes and genes, we did mention about karyotypes, and this one is basically your entire chromosome for any organism. So for human beings, your karyotype might be the picture of the 23 pairs of chromosomes, those 23 pairs of X's that you see in the previous lesson. Okay, so that's your karyotype. And the last one is, what does DNA stand for? And this is deoxyribonucleic acid. Okay, so please make sure that you have all the correct answers. And that any section that you may have missed, go back and review them in your own time. This brings us to the lesson for today, which is a bit of a heavy one, but you can always do your own research and go on to BBC Bitesize for some really good articles on these, okay? So today we're looking at stem cells, and by the end of this lesson, hopefully you'll be able to do these 2 things, which is define the term stem cell and identify where they can be found in plants and animals, as well as describe how stem cells can be obtained and used, while we discuss the risk, benefits, and ethical issues surrounding these processes. And with this being a video, I'm not going to show you the actual video, but if you see any links on the booklets, be sure to check them out because they do contain some really good information. It might be a video on that lesson, it just explains it in a different way that I do. So don't hesitate to watch just this video. Make sure that you go out and explore a little bit on your own as well. Okay. Right, so stem cells. Now, you may have heard the term stem cells before, you may have not, but I'll try to make this as simple as possible. So, in a nutshell, stem cells are basically these cells that aren't specialized for anything. They're kind of like blank slates. And so what the body can do then is you can actually take those stem cells and you can program them into becoming any type of cell. Okay, so let's read on in the first part here. So it says, in the early 1900s, scientists discovered that some cell could generate new blood cells. This is the first identification of what would later be called stem cells. The overall discovery is not by one scientist, but by ongoing collaborative and extended work of scientists as a profession. So it's not just that we discovered stem cells one day and now we understand everything about it. We actually don't know a lot about stem cells because there are a lot of ethical issues around this topic. All right. So here's the definition. Stem cells are undifferentiated cells that are able to differentiate into specialized cell types. And there are two types of stem cells. It's not just one type of stem cell for everything. And those two are right here. So you have two types which are called embryonic stem cells and adult stem cells. Okay, so embryonic stem cells is number one, where it says embryos are formed during the blastocyst phase of embryological development. Now that might seem like a lot of information, but it's really in the couple days after an egg is fertilized by a sperm cell, it's going to start duplicating. All right. Now, the first types of cells that emerge from those duplication are going to be stem cells, and those stem cells later become your body. So, in those 9 months that a fetus is developing inside of a uterus, the stem cells are mainly the cause for that, for it to grow and form different parts. And so that's why when a baby is born, you'll have all the different body types, okay, or sorry, the body parts. Now, what happens to those stem cells when you stop developing? Okay, so when you are considered an adult, when you're done developing, you become an adult. And those adult stem cells are actually a little bit different from embryonic stem cells. Okay, so I'm going to add these two terms here. One is totipotent, okay, and that refers to embryonic stem cells, and the other is pluripotent. So the reason why I'm having you write this right now is because we're going to explain what totipotent and pluripotent is in a second here. All right. So totipotent has the ability to become basically any type of cell in the body. Right. You have a stem cell, you can program it to become a brain cell, a liver cell, a muscle cell, nerve cell. Right. It's a blank slate. The thing with pluripotent is that it can only become the type of cell that it comes from. So if you have an adult stem cell that comes from the bone marrow, okay, you should know that bone marrow produces red blood cells. So then you can take those adult stem cells from the bone marrow and you can actually program them to only become blood cells. You can't take, a cell that's destined to be a blood cell and turn it into a nerve cell. Okay, it doesn't work like that. So more on that in a little bit here. Plants are a little bit different because they don't function the same way as we do. Plants are a different system as all cells retain the ability to differentiate at any point. However, specific stem cells are found only in the meristem tissue. So I want you to highlight that last bit, and we're not going to go in depth on this, but I do want you to add this annotation on the side that the meristem tissue is generally found in places like the roots, the stem, and the very, very tips of plants, okay? And this is just so that, if you have stem cells in your root cells, then those stem cells can differentiate into root hair cells, whereas if you're in the shoot tips, okay, or the stem, then you might differentiate into xylem cells, or you might differentiate into just regular leaf cells that have lots of chloroplasts in them, okay? So that's essentially what a stem cell is. It can differentiate into any type of cell, okay, depending on if they're totipotent or pluripotent. So let's look at the next part here. So we have embryonic versus adult cells. This first part here is quite important. Embryonic stem cells are found in the early stages of development of an embryo after fertilization. Okay, so this is what I mentioned before. After an egg and a sperm are put together in the uterus, then those really, really early days of development is when you will find embryonic stem cells, okay? So these cells are called totipotent, and that means that they have the ability to become any type of other cell in the organism, okay? So important part there is that they can only become another type of cell in an organism. So they can't become, a type of cell that doesn't exist in humans, all right? Stem cells don't really have that sort of capability, but that is the cool part, is that embryonic stem cells are basically these blank slates that you can program into becoming anything you want, right? Within reason. So have a look at this picture on the next slide here. All right. Now you'll see that it goes into two ways. All right. So we're going to look on the left side first. If you see, all right, this is just a basic visual of what's happening. So you have a sperm and an egg cell at the very top there. And once it's fertilized, then those cells will start replicating and they start dividing. So they go through the cell cycle over and over and over again. So one cell becomes two, two becomes four, four becomes eight, and after a couple days, you're going to form what's called a blastocyst. All right, so that's the third circle there. And you'll notice that inside the blastocyst, there's a little concentrated section where it's these peach colored circles. All right, so those are actually your embryonic stem cells, right? If we didn't extract them or do anything to them, those embryonic stem cells are essentially what become you, all right? So what we can do then is we can extract these stem cells, right? And we can then program them to become different types of cells, okay? So in this specific example, they seem to become adult neural stem cells, so having to do with nerve cells, okay? So that's going to be kind of where embryonic stem cells come really, really in handy, all right? So going back to the booklet here. So that's your embryonic stem cells. Adult stem cells, all right, so we're starting on line 24. Adult stem cells exist throughout the body after embryonic development and are found inside of different types of tissue. So they can be found in tissues such as brain, bone marrow, blood vessels, skeletal muscles, skin, and the liver. All right, so I want you to highlight that bit right there. So like I said, you can find these adult stem cells all over your body, but the issue is that they can only be programmed for that type of cell. So from the organ that they originate from, that's the only type of cell that they can become. All right, so you can't take a stem cell from your skin and expect it to become muscles or blood. All right. Continuing on, it says they remain in a quiescent or non-dividing state for years until activated by disease or tissue injury. So just really quickly, there's a word there that you probably have never heard before, and that's this one right here. So quiescent is just another word for inactive or dormant, which just means that it's there, it's just not doing anything yet. So when you might catch a disease or you might get some sort of injury, that's when these stem cells come into action. So they're kind of on call or like on standby. So if you ever, fall and scrape your knee, then that's a tissue injury, right? Because you start bleeding. And so what happens is the skin cells around the cut will start to, release those stem cells, or they become activated, and they start forming new skin cells, which is why your skin starts to heal over time. All right. Adult stem cells can divide or self-renew indefinitely, enabling them to generate a range of cell types from the originating origin, or even regenerate the entire original organ. So this comes in really handy if, let's say, you have someone who has to take their liver taken out, right? Then you can get a donor who donates liver cells, and you can cultivate an entirely new liver, and then implant it onto the person who's missing one. Now, this process obviously takes a really, really long time. Okay, it's much easier just to get a liver donor. All right. But there's always some complications about, is it going to be accepted? Is it going to be rejected? Is it the right size? Do you have the right blood type? There's a lot of restrictions that you have to meet in order to actually donate things. Whereas stem cells, you can actually program them in order to be not rejected by the host. So that means that adult stem cells are said to be pluripotent. So there's that word right there. And that means that they can become other cells, but are limited in their options depending on which organ they originate from. So just highlight that whole bit right there. Okay. And we are going to talk a little bit more about, how stem cells are used actually. All right. So going to this picture again, now we're going to look on the right side here. All right. So on the right side, we start off with a biopsy, which means that we just take out the cells from wherever we need to. So in this specific example, we're still working with the same outcome that we want to make them into neural stem cells, but you'll notice that there's a step called reprogramming. All right. So what scientists have discovered they can do is they can actually program these stem cells to become a different type of cell. Okay, not that a muscle cell can become a nerve cell, but you can actually program them into specific types. So this one is specifically called induced pluripotent stem cells. Induced means that we kind of force that cell to become something, all right? And that's where the programming comes in, okay? So just for this moment right here, as long as you understand that pluripotent cells can only become the types of cells that they come from, i.e. being that, you know, a brain cell can only become a brain cell, or a skin cell can only become a skin cell. That's all you need to know at this point, okay? All right, so let's talk about some of the medical stuff that we can do with this. So adult stem cells have been used for treatment since 1968, when the first bone marrow transplant was performed to successfully treat two siblings with severe combined immunodeficiency. So immunodeficiency is, it's kind of in the name. It has to do with your immune system. So your bone marrow, which produces blood cells, also produces white blood cells. So if your bone marrow is producing bad white blood cells or inefficient blood cells, that means that you're going to be sick most of the time, because your white bloods aren't strong enough to fight off diseases. So in order to combat that, what you can do is you can transplant someone else's bone marrow, and your body will use that instead. So it's kind of like, you know, the white blood cells in your body act as a police, but your police aren't very strong. What you can do is you can take the police from someone else's body and put them in your own. That's much stronger. So then you'll be able to combat that immunodeficiency, right? Your immune system will actually become stronger. I mean, I put it in a really simple terms. Obviously, it's a lot more complicated than that. You have to make sure that you both are, you know, compatible with each other. So to move on, somatic stem cells. So just to reaffirm here, somatic just means that they're adult stem cells. Okay, somatic stem cells are used to treat a variety of diseases. However, the harvesting of them involves a very painful operation, especially those in the bone marrow. So if you don't remember, bone marrow is essentially right in the middle of your bones. Okay, it's the inner part. So to get there, you actually have to, you know, get a needle inside your bones, which is not a fun process. All right. Although there are lots of places, lots of hospitals and donation centers that will accept any stem cell donors, right? It is one of the things that most people don't know about and don't do because it's a painful process, but it is required quite often. Although certain stem cells can be harvested from other sources, including the umbilical cord, which, if banked after birth, the cord blood contains stem cells that can treat blood disorders in children. So when you are born, all right, you have a cord from your belly button that attaches yourself to the mother, all right? So that umbilical cord actually contains a lot of nutrients, and it also contains a lot of stem cells as well. Like I said, that can treat lots of disorders in children. So lots of people will actually save the umbilical cord after their children are born to the hospital that they were born in. All right. So you can either donate them, you can keep them. There are lots of, you know, medical things that prove that umbilical cords are very, very healthy, and you can actually consume them. Okay, you can actually eat them if you want. They'll turn them into like a pill form, but you know, like I said, there's lots of gray areas in here that, you know, we've done research, but they're not conclusive yet, which means that we can't prove it 100% of the time. Okay. So it says when treating a disease, you can sometimes use your own stem cells or they can be donated. And I've been saying this over and over again. You just need to make sure that you're compatible. So you can do a little bit of research on blood types. So for instance, if you have, if you know your blood type, so let's say for instance that you're B positive, right? You have there's several different blood types, but B positive is one of them. You then can only accept blood from other people who have the same blood type as you. And then once you get into like O positive or O negative, then you know you can donate blood to anyone, but you can only take in blood from O positive people. You know, there's lots of different things that you can learn about blood types, but that is one of the requirements when you are donating. You need to make sure that blood type is compatible. Okay. I just want to make an extra note here on the side, being saying that stem cells can also help other conditions such as spinal cord injuries, Parkinson's disease, heart disease, and cancer. All right. So once you go into detail about what these things are, such as Parkinson's or cancer or heart disease, you begin to understand that stem cells is actually a really most efficient way to treat some of these conditions. So, for instance, there are actually lots of famous people who suffer from Parkinson's. One being Ian Holm, who played Bilbo Baggins in Lord of the Rings. Probably the most prominent actor who has done a lot of research into Parkinson's disease is Michael J. Fox, who was the hero or the main actor in Back to the Future series. Okay, so just to kind of give you a really quick bit about Parkinson's. So Parkinson's is, you can notice Parkinson's if someone is shaking a lot uncontrollably. And there's mild Parkinson's, there's severe Parkinson's. But if you've ever seen an interview with Michael J. Fox recently, you'll notice that his hands are always shaking. And that's not voluntary, all right? They can't control that. And it's a neuromuscular disease that basically affects how they can control their muscles. And lots of people have described it being very painful. And so what stem cells can do then is actually they can replace some of those muscle cells, those nerve cells that aren't working the way that they're supposed to be. Okay, it just does take a bit of research to find out the perfect way to do this. Right. So moving on, we're still talking about the medical issues here, how they're used, and so we're going to talk about embryonic cells for a little bit here. Embryonic stem cells have a more arduous history and use because they are extracted from embryonic tissue. They are then allowed to divide and grow, producing more stem cells. All right. Therefore, it is a painless and quick process. In around 6 days, you have more stem cells. So what we can do is, after an egg has been fertilized, we can take those stem cells from the egg that is, or sorry, I should say blastocyst that is forming, because after about 6 days, then you have a lot of stem cells that you can then use. The tissue comes for treatment in making the cells differentiate into cells that are required. So this process is called therapeutic cloning. So when I mentioned before that you can actually program certain stem cells to do certain things, this is what I was talking about. The embryo is given the same DNA as the patient, meaning no rejection. So what you can do is you can take the DNA from the patient, and you can take the stem cells, which were taken from anywhere, it doesn't matter where, and you basically swap the nucleus, or you swap the DNA. So then after the stem cells start replicating, you now have a bunch of stem cells that have the same DNA as the patient. And what this means is then when you insert those stem cells back into the patient, the white blood cells in the patient will not attack it, because white blood cells are programmed to attack anything that is foreign. So anything that it seems like it doesn't belong there, the white blood cells will attack. But having the DNA, the same DNA as your body, white blood cells will kind of see it as, oh, this is, this comes from our body, so we don't need to attack it. The cells could be differentiated into nerve cells for paralyzed patients or insulin-producing cells for diabetics. So these are just a couple solutions for how cells can be used. Both of these treatments, although expensive, would then save the NHS thousands in further care of the patient. So instead of just, giving insulin for the rest of a diabetic's life, you could insert programmed stem cells that would solve the issue right there and then. Right? The only problem, as it states, is that it's really expensive. Okay? So let me just show you a quick picture here. Make sure you have this highlighted because I'm going to cover this in a second here. So this is just a visual of the process that I just talked about of therapeutic cloning. All right? So you have, at the very top, you have the original stem cell. All right? And the DNA is removed. All right? And then what we do is we insert skin cells from a type 1 diabetic patient. So then the DNA is transferred into the stem cell and it starts to replicate. All right, so then you have the blastocyst. Then you take out the embryonic stem cells and then you can differentiate them into insulin-producing stem cells, or sorry, insulin-producing pancreatic cells that will then cure the diabetic patient. All right. All right, so if this is such a good thing, why do we not just do it? Okay, why is this such an issue where people have a lot of problems with it? So the issue with stem cells is mostly ethical, especially embryonic stem cells that are extracted from a forming embryo that can develop into a human. So ask yourselves this question: when does human life begin? Okay, This is where a lot of people will have different opinions on, and whatever opinion you have, I'm not saying anyone is right or anyone is wrong, but because of these different opinions, is the reason why there's so much controversy around this topic. So, does life begin when an egg is fertilized with the sperm, or when the two nuclei fuse together, or is it when a baby is actually born, or is it somewhere in between, or is it when you can actually see that it has a face? When is it that life actually begins? When do they have a conscience? Because no one remembers being inside of their mother's stomach, right? No one can remember that. So is it when your memories start, or So there's a lot of controversy behind this because at the end of the day, you are destroying an embryo, right? You are destroying something that could have the potential to become a life, all right? But that being said, what do you do about the people who, decide to have an abortion or don't want to have a child? You know, is it up to them? Is it up to the child who's not even born yet? So you can have a lot of really good debates about this. But the bottom line is we haven't really come to a conclusion. So let's move on. Also, sometimes human cells are placed inside of animals to see how they develop, and this creates what's called a chimera, all right, or a chimera, however one you pronounce it. So what this is, I have a picture in the bottom right corner here, is in Greek mythology, a chimera was basically a fire-breathing creature with traits of a lion, a goat, and a dragon. Okay, also had a tail of a snake. So in human beings, a chimera is more so a person who has two totally different sets of DNA inside their body. Now, this is very hypothetical. It doesn't really mean that there are people out there with, a human being that has a DNA of a lion. We know for a fact that this can't happen yet, but we can definitely do a lot more research into this, okay? All right, so that brings us to kind of the thinking portion of our lesson. So let's do these checkpoints. There's a learning activity after this, and if you want to rewatch some parts or reread some sections, feel free to do that. But this checkpoint says there are mixed opinions about the potential use of embryonic stem cells for the treatment of human diseases. Many people feel that there are good reasons for carrying out this research, but others oppose these studies. Evaluate the ethical arguments surrounding the use of embryonic stem cells in medical research. So basically, what we want you to do is we want you to take two sides and argue for both. All right, what are the good things about both sides? So basically, you start off with two statements. You support stem cell research or you don't support stem cell research. And so if you choose the side of you support stem cell research, then you want to argue about all the good things that can come from stem cell research. And if you choose you don't support stem cell research, you can either go one or two ways. You can either talk about things, other solutions to stem cell research, or you can talk about the bad things about stem cell research. Okay, so I'll let you pause the video and take a good couple minutes to think about this. Go back and search your own thoughts. What is your opinion on stem cell research? All right, so I hope you have a good number of points here. You didn't have to make them in full sentences. Sorry, I forgot to mention that. But if you have bullet points for what you want to say, that's fine. So I'll just present some of my own opinions here. I'm not saying that most of these are right, but I'm just going to try my best to go off the facts of what I've just told you in this lesson. So, in support of stem cell research, here's a few points of what you can argue for. So, stem cell research could cure or treat many diseases that could potentially end someone's life. So, we know that cancer is a very, very dangerous disease, and it kills millions of people all over the world every day. With a good understanding of stem cell research, we could cure cancer. Potentially. We don't know. So it is kind of an unknown. I'm not saying that stem cell research can cure cancer, but it can definitely help with some forms of cancer. Okay. We could also produce limbs and organs for those missing. So those people who have prosthetics, if they're not happy with prosthetics, then we could provide them with limbs, right? or people who have heart failure or liver failure or kidney failure. We could cultivate or we can produce these organs, right? And we can give it to them. And as we mentioned before, doing stem cell research or having stem cell treatment can save you money in the long term instead of, buying insulin for the rest of your life. You can do one big treatment, one big operation, and get some stem cells, and then you don't have to pay them for the rest of your life. Okay, hopefully. All right, so that's a couple things for supporting stem cell research. You may or may not have the same points, or you might have different ones. But this is where, in a normal classroom, we would kind of get together and discuss as a class who supports it, who doesn't support it. All right. So if you do not support stem cell research, these are some of the things that you could say. Getting stem cells means the destruction of a fertilized human egg. So this is one of the strongest arguments for people who oppose stem cell research. Because getting the stem cells means that you have to eliminate a potential human life. Okay, so that is one of the hardest things about stem cell research is how do you go about it in an ethical and morally correct way. Okay. Another one is that we don't know a lot about it and what the consequences are. So you might have noticed that when I'm explaining the good points about stem cell research, I always add in, but we're not sure yet. We don't know 100% if it's going to cure it. So that is one of the things, the trade-offs, right? Do you eliminate a potential human life in order to have just a chance at curing something, right? If you have a chance to cure something, do you kill something in order to get it? So that's kind of a cost and evaluation there. Most adult stem cells are pre-specialized. Okay, so adult stem cells, they can only become the organ that they come from, and this is kind of goes both ways because yes, you can get stem cells, or sorry, you can get adult stem cells for your heart, your blood, your nerves, and we have no problem with that. But they are specialized, which means that if there was a shortage of bone marrow donors, then you wouldn't be able to use heart cell donor cells in order to get bone marrow ones. So it's you have to have categories, okay? And the last thing is very simple. It's very expensive, right? It's never a good thing. And that's just, no matter how you look at it, there may be a time when stem cell research becomes very cheap. We don't know. But at the moment, we know that it is quite expensive. Okay? All right, moving along. Right, so in the next one here, you have a table with advantages and disadvantages of both embryonic and adult stem cells. So this is just a recap of what we talked about. What are the good things about embryonic stem cells? What are the bad things about it? And same thing, good and bad about adult stem cells. And there's 3 slots for each advantage, disadvantage, or each column. So try and fill in as much as you can. If you're struggling, make sure you have at least 2 in each one. Okay, so I'll give you time to pause the video, go back and reread some of the passages in this lesson. Perfect. All right, so I'm going to start off in order here. So let's start off with some of the advantages of having embryonic stem cells. So they are totipotent, which means that they can become any type of stem cell, right? Or sorry, any type of cell. Embryonic stem cells are painless and quick, right? You just have to extract a tiny blastocyst. It's not very big. It's not the same as jamming a needle into your knee and getting bone marrow. And what you can do with embryonic stem cells is you can insert your own DNA to reduce the risk of rejection. I did forget to mention that if your body decides to reject something, your body will react very badly. Okay, kind of like how you have allergies. Sometimes you might have hay fever, and that's just your body's natural response to defend itself. Okay, so you'll notice that you sneeze more, or you have a runny nose, and these are all defense mechanisms to prevent pollen from getting more into your respiratory system. Okay, so those are some advantages of embryonic stem cells. Let's talk about some disadvantages of embryonic stem cells. So this is the bad parts about it. So you have to destroy potential human life. Not good. long process to reduce risks like therapeutic cloning. So that process of inserting your own DNA to reduce risk, that is a long process, and it is also quite expensive. All right, adult stem cells. What are some good things about adult stem cells? So, they could become specialized cells like your brain cell, right? So we can cure or treat some things that require additional brain cells. They can divide and renew indefinitely. So that term indefinitely is a key term. All right, make sure you have that down because cells that can't do that, they can't divide and renew indefinitely, means that they have a lifespan, right? That means there's a ticking clock. Whereas adult stem cells, if they can divide and renew indefinitely, that means that they're kind of living on forever, right? And they self-renew. They don't need the help of anyone else. And we do know, because we've been treating lots of people with adult stem cells for the past 50 years, we know that it's been successful in treating certain diseases. So for the ones that we do know, we do have a solution for them. Okay? Some of the bad things about adult stem cells is it only becomes specialized cell it originates from. So that is a restriction, right? So brain cells can only become brain cells, nerve cells can only become nerve cells. So there is kind of a restriction to that. A brain cell cannot become a nerve cell, or a nerve cell cannot become a blood cell. So there is a bit of restriction that doesn't give it the full capabilities as embryonic stem cells. Another one is that it's painful. It's a painful process to extract those adult stem cells because they are coming straight from your body. When you're an adult, you actually feel this. You have nerves to actually feel things coming out of your body. Whereas a blastocyst, it's not typically, it doesn't have nerve cells to feel anything yet. Okay. The last one there requires a donor. I kind of put that in there because adult stem cells are a bit tricky because adults have the difference between an embryo and an adult is an adult is able to make decisions for itself, right? And so lots of people choose not to give up stem cells. And so this makes it a requirement to have donors. So for instance, I was always called to donate blood because I have a blood type that most people can receive. And so they would call me and ask me, can we count on you to donate your blood one more time, please? And that is something that's a choice. You know, I'm not required to give blood just because I have a certain blood type, but it is a restriction for the medical department, being that they need people to step up and to give these adult stem cells, okay? So lots of controversial topics. I would have loved to be in a classroom and talk more about this stuff, but hopefully this does just enough for you. Feel free to watch videos on YouTube that talk more about stem cells because it is important that you get both sides of it. So you don't have to say, you know, oh, stem cells are the greatest, why don't we do this all the time? Or you don't have to say, you know, stem cells are bad, we're killing human lives, we need to stop this now. It's important to have both sides of the argument and make a decision for yourself, but also respect the fact that people are entitled to their own opinions and their own beliefs. Okay. Right, so we get to the last part here, which is the do now, which has a total of 10 questions. And as always, I do want you to try the 8 questions at least, and then the last 2 questions are going to be a little bit more thinking questions, which we can go through together. All right, so pause the video really quickly and get started on those. Right. Okay, so state the 2 types of stem cells. These are going to be embryonic and somatic or adult. Number 2, state where embryonic stem cells are found. This is going to be in the early stages of development in the embryo. Or you could use the word blastocyst. That works as well because you are correct. That's where embryonic stem cells are found. Number 3, identify 2 tissues that provide adult stem cells. So we did list off quite a number of them. So any 2 of the following: brain, bone marrow, blood, skeletal tissue, or your liver cells, liver tissue. These are places where you can find adult stem cells. Number 4, complete descendants. Embryonic cells are what kind of potent? So this is totipotent. So make sure that you do understand the difference between totipotent and pluripotent. Easiest way I remember is toti kind of has the word total in it, and total means everything, right? So totipotent cells, stem cells can become everything. So that kind of answers question 5. What does question 4 mean? and that just means that totipotent means the ability to become whatever type of cell within the organism. All right. Number 6, identify what a chimera is in humans. So a chimera or a chimera is a person who has two different sets of DNA inside them. Number 7, in therapeutic cloning, what happens to the DNA in the cell? So refer back to the picture on previously when I was talking about therapeutic cloning. And so I just put down the main process there. The embryo is given is given the same DNA as the patient, meaning there's no rejection. The cells could be differentiated into nerve cells for paralyzed patients or insulin-producing cells for diabetics. And the last one, number 8, state where the stem cells are in plants. This is called the meristem tissue. Okay. So please make sure that at least for these 8 questions you have the correct answer, and we'll move on to the last 2. So number 9, Parkinson's disease. So remember, Parkinson's is the one where people have tremors or shakes and they can't control it. So Parkinson's disease is an issue with signals from the brain, and it wants you to suggest how stem cells could help treat it. So if you think about it, stem cells could be cultivated into nerve cells. So the stem cells, they're differentiated. You make them turn into nerve cells that are good and healthy. They have no problems. And then those new nerve cells can then be implanted into the patient, where it will replace the old nerve cells. Okay. Number 10, suggest why using embryos unused during IVF is seen as more ethically responsible than creating a new one. So I didn't mention this, but IVF stands for in vitro fertilization, which means that you fertilize an egg outside of the uterus, so not by natural means. All right. So why is IVF seen more as ethically responsible than creating a new one? So IVF is when an egg is fertilized outside the body and then implanted into the uterus. And this is more ethical because it still has the natural process of the embryo developing inside the uterus, as opposed to creating a baby in a test tube. Okay? So now, that's not to say that this is ethically correct, because there is a form of unnaturalness to this. You're still fertilizing an egg outside the human body. So that's obviously, that part's not natural, but you are still letting it develop inside of a human body, which does seem a lot more natural than letting it cultivate inside of a lab. Okay, so there you have it. Stem cells is a hot topic for science, and it is a really, really fun debate to have once in a while. Okay, so thank you for watching. Hope you kept up with most of the information here. Feel free to look back and rewatch some bits if you need to. Okay, thanks.